one of the three fiscal anchors for this government was a declining debt to GDP ratio. Don't believe me? Look it up in Hansard.
This is getting spicy here. Welcome back to Moose and Loose. My name's David. Today we've got the Parliamentary Budget Officer absolutely scorching Mark Carney on CTV. We also have a Liberal magazine praising Mark Carney and multiple members of his team. What do you think the reason for that is? Let's jump into this. Here we got Mark Carney on this Toronto Life podcast here. I believe this is a magazine. You can see Toronto Life. He gets asked a bunch of softball questions because, well, we've got this here posted by Evan Solomon, Mark Carney's AI minister. Change happens when people work together with purpose and imagination. What's he talking about? Well, Toronto Life, you can see here the most influentials 2025. And who's on the list? It's Evan Solomon, number 16. What a joke. This is a liberal leftist magazine podcast. There are a couple good tidbits of information here that Mark Carney slips out, and one good question. In this case here, he's talking about Donald Trump, and listen to this.
Look, the president, he respects straight talk and understanding what our objectives are. And the consequence of that has been that we are in a position where 85% of our trade is still tariff-free. We have the lowest average tariff of any country in the world. We do have some issues which we're working through. I find the best way to address those issues is to make sure we're talking, we're in the game, we're playing the game. And that's what we're doing right now.
Except we're not playing the game and he's not talking with them. They've already come out and said they haven't had any communication with Donald Trump in a while now. He'll say anything and everything. We have the best deal. This is a deal that he didn't make. And we have numerous industries getting slammed right now. Listen to this little tidbit here.
And I'm finding, look, I became a politician less than a year ago. I became a politician. I find people prefer to be their politicians to be straight with them. They don't always agree with you, but at least they appreciate that that's what you're trying to do. And in that regard, then and that is a Canadian value, I think, to be open and honest with people. And in that regard, we can swim against this tide.
If he's trying to imply that he's straight with people, he's open and honest, get real. I mean, come on, dude. This guy started his campaign by lying about semiconductors, saying that Canada is the biggest exporter to the United States, which is nowhere even remotely close. We export somewhat like 0.5% of semiconductors to America. That's how he started it, being open, honest, and straight. Meanwhile, we've got this nonsense. How is this for being open, honest? Now, what exactly is Toronto Life? Well, it's a magazine here, online magazine. You can see different articles, more cultural stuff. They have this 50 most influential Torontonians of 2025 article, more culture, more city, local stories. But going back to the most influential Torontonians, as we've seen with Evan Solomon, Mark Carney minister, if we go further down here though, we've got Anna Belau, CEO of Build Canada Homes, because she's Carney's new point person on affordable housing. Now, if you go the other direction, who's number one on this list? Take a guess. Who do you think is number one? Look, here's Doug Ford, number 3. Who do you think is number 1? The Blue Jays, number 2? It's Mark Carney. That's right. Mark Carney's number 1 on this list. How is he a Torontonian? As far as we know, the only house he has is in the Rockcliffe area of Ottawa. But don't worry, they can just fudge it because they know who pays the bills. It's the Liberal Party of Canada. As you see here, $906,000. Mark Carney gave to this magazine, and then they made him number 1 on their list. Mark Carney was Prime Minister at this time. Toronto Life Publishing Company Limited. This is a grant. You can see up in the top here, grants. This is his taxpayer money being given to this publication. You can see every year, $754,000 Justin Trudeau gave to them last year. The year before, $688,636. Notice how this just keeps going up and up. $570,000, $81,000, $506, $126. This is the same year as this one. $506 the year before that, $571. The Liberals have been giving this publication our money for years, and then they post stuff that reflects positively on the Liberal Party of Canada. This is ridiculous. How is this not a conflict of interest when the Prime Minister is giving money to this company? Our country's corrupt. Jumping over to CTV, we've got Jason Jacques, interim parliamentary budget officer, absolutely scorching Carney on here. He's not holding back.
And of course, the biggest risk with all of this is if you're not spending on productive capital investments, if you have an overly broad definition, then you're not going to get the investment impact and the growth in the economy that the government expects.
What about fiscal anchors? That's what we spoke about the last time you were here. You were really tracking this very closely. They've obviously changed from what they promised to be the fiscal anchor, debt to GDP, and the platform to deficit to GDP. What do you see there?
Certainly, in the case of the deficit to GDP, it should come as no surprise that I agree with not the new government, but the previous government that indicated that the debt to GDP ratio is the most important medium-term indicator of fiscal sustainability and essential for securing Canada's AAA credit rating.
That's quite something, saying that anyone agrees with the previous Liberal government over Mark Carney's. Like, what a shot here. I mean, look at his face. This guy's kind of like a cartoon character. He's very animated. And he's right. What Carney's doing here, hiding essentially $94 billion, moving it to capital versus operational spending, it's disgraceful. He shouldn't be allowed to do this.
The government has cut that anchor. So that is no longer part of the suite of fiscal anchors the government is using. And it's certainly not our place to judge which fiscal anchors the government uses. At the same time, the way in which the government went about this was certainly not transparent. So we've had this fiscal anchor for over 30 years. Other jurisdictions look at the debt to GDP anchor and a declining level of debt to GDP as being the mainstay of fiscal anchors. It's something that the Liberal Party of Canada campaigned on in 2025 in April. It was in their platform. And without any discussion whatsoever, this fiscal anchor was eliminated.
And what about if you did apply that calculation? Like, where do you see debt to GDP? Because you had identified that in the lead up to the budget as, you know, one of the primary things informing your position at the time, which was very controversial, that things were unsustainable fiscally, that we were looking over a fiscal cliff. So where is debt to GDP going? And why do you conclude in this that things are still sustainable?
So in the case of debt to GDP, over the medium term and over the longer term, debt to GDP is effectively going to be flat. So we no longer have a declining debt to GDP ratio. Based upon our calculations, there's very limited limited margin for error based upon the government's fiscal agenda at this point. And of course, looking back, it's important to remember that this is very different than what we've seen over the past 30 years.
The numbers don't lie. We see Canada 31.6 here, net debt, gross debt 106.5. General government gross debt 2025 112, putting us 10th place, as it says here, government debt as percentage of GDP in percentage points. We have the 10th worst debt to GDP ratio. Canada is going down a slippery slope and very quickly. And what's Mark Carney doing? He's hanging out Grey Cup. This guy doesn't do anything but go to sports events. That's what he's using his role here as Prime Minister to do. Enrich himself with Brookfield and go to sports events. He's not getting deals with Donald Trump. Trump removing the tariffs off of food because of Americans pushing back, not because of anything that Carney's done.
Why are you saying now that it's sustainable, but a few months ago that was not? Like, were you mistaken before, or is the calculation on
in terms of, so previously, these numbers are very similar to the numbers we saw previously. The definition of sustainability is your debt to GDP ratio is stable or declining over time. And that's not my definition. That's the government's definition. That's the definition from the International Monetary Fund. So based upon the widely accepted international definition, that was the case before. That continues to be the case now.
So you still think the fiscal situation here is unsustainable?
I think the current fiscal situation, we moved into new territory. So based upon the previous government's fiscal anchors, it was a situation where the government, if they were targeting a stable or declining debt to GDP ratio, then there was very limited margin for error or room for maneuver. Now we're in a situation where the government makes no pretense about having a stable or declining debt to GDP ratio. We're in a new territory where it appears as if the government is making the argument that in comparison to other countries, we have room to spend. So because our debt levels are lower than some other countries, we can go out, we can borrow the money, and we can spend the money the next time that there's an economic shock and if we need to. And that,
do you think that's true? Pardon the interruption. Do you think that's true? They say the IMF agrees. Do you think it's true?
I think hopefully the government can go out and borrow additional money at this point. It's not a question of borrowing the money. It's a question of what the money is fundamentally going to be spent on. And as
Brookfield. Sorry, I had something in my throat there. This is some pretty scathing stuff. Him saying this is unsustainable. The government has basically removed the guardrails and just opened it wide up. They're not using these anchor points to base where our country's sitting in regards to debt and GDP ratio. Carney's a smart guy. Like, let's not forget, Mark Carney's sought after, as you saw from a previous video there, Frank McKenna talking about Stephen A. Schwartzman here, the CEO chairman of Blackstone, wanted Mark Carney, which is in this audio interview here. And I'll be updating this on the chart soon. I've got another bombshell video coming out soon, which is part of of the board lower than here. So once I put that out, then I'll update the chart here. But there's a bunch of people that want Mark Carney part of their company because he's a very smart banker. Unfortunately, he's not using his smarts to help us. He's using it to enrich himself, pushing everyone towards the carbon credit system here because he's invested in it. This guy shouldn't be our prime minister.
Somebody who's responsible for fiscal transparency, I do need to point out that nobody has had this discussion. So during the 2025 election campaign, all major political parties identified a declining debt to GDP ratio as being the most important fiscal anchor. We're now in a situation on September 18th, in response to a question in QP, the Prime Minister himself said one of the three fiscal anchors for this government was a declining debt to GDP ratio. Don't believe me? Look it up in Hansard. All of a sudden in the budget, that anchor that we've had for 30 years, the most important fiscal anchor, is gone without any discussion whatsoever. And now we're in new territory where potentially we're going to be borrowing substantially more money the next time that there's an economic shock. And it's not for me to judge that. It is for me to point out that nobody has had a meaningful discussion around that.
Before I let you go, I mentioned.
But don't worry, Mark Carney's banker buddies are going to get rich from borrowing so much money. We're getting fleeced here. Liberal voters don't even know what's going on here. Conservatives see what's going on. They're spending money willy-nilly, giving out grants, contributions, government contracts to Brookfield companies, Brookfield-related people, insiders, the dairy cartel, jacking up our debt. Banker buddies get rich. The Goldman Sachs guys are laughing all the way to the bank. Canadians get the bill.
How there was quite a bit of reaction among the government ranks to your initial analysis. They posted your job on a permanent basis, and they used in the job posting the candidate has to show, quote, tact and discretion and communicate in a neutral way. Do you think that's aimed at you?
I hope it is. I've worked on the Hill for 17 years. I've dealt with thousands of parliamentarians. I've also been responsible for the electoral platform costing exercise in the 2019, 2021, and most recent elections. And so I have a lot of experience, probably more experience than most people around town do, in dealing with parliamentarians across political parties who come from different cultural backgrounds, different linguistic backgrounds, and tactfully and discreetly working with political parties around the platform promises that they want to make, even in situations where they don't necessarily like the numbers that we're giving back to them. And I absolutely think it's an essential part of the character, the individual that should occupy the permanent post of PBO.
And forgive me if this is too personal, you don't have to answer. Will you apply to be the permanent one?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's, from my own perspective, having worked in the office since the beginning, I think it's important that parliamentarians have the choice. So they will have the choice that they've seen what I plan on doing and how I plan on managing the office. They have the choice for this approach, the current approach, or they have a choice for a new approach. And if the Prime Minister decides he wants to go in a different direction along with members of Parliament, I certainly respect that. And I certainly plan to be with the office regardless of the outcome to support whoever is in that role.
Okay.
I hope he gets that job, as he's not going to get it though if Carney's in power, because obviously Carney wants him out because he's a straight shooter. We'd be lucky to have this guy as our parliamentary budget officer.
Forgive me for this one. Can you, on that note, can you compliment Pierre Poilievre?
Of course I can compliment Pierre Poilievre. What would you like to compliment about?
Tell me three things that you admire about him.
His hair is impeccable. He's a hard worker, and he loves his family.
Okay.
That's telling. The first one and the third one, those are just really generic, but a hard worker. That tells you that Carney doesn't like how hard Pierre keeps pushing. He will keep pushing back against all his stuff. And that's probably a thorn in his side, and that's probably why we see the CBC hammering the guy day after day after day, $1 million a day, just keep running garbage about him. Rumors and all sorts of fabricated stories without any sources. He doesn't like how hard Pierre works, and that's why they want to get rid of him. If he wasn't a real threat, he wasn't a good leader, they wouldn't even care. They're like, whatever, when we have an election, we'll just obliterate that guy. But clearly they're terrified of him.
I'm wondering, what is the best perk of the job? And I won't accept meeting Canadians coast to coast to coast.
That's exactly easy. That's exactly what came into my head, and that is, I mean, you're not going to allow me that, but that is the best element of the job without question. So it's it's very much a distant second. Look, I would say that it's a perk and it's a responsibility. You have available to you as Prime Minister the resources of the country.
I'm sorry, what? I'm sorry, what? If you look at this chart and realize what Mark Carney just said there, you have available to you as Prime Minister the resources of the country. I got nothing to say to that. I mean, come on. Carney speaking a little too frank here.
To make a decision, not necessarily the resources to spend or deploy as you wish, but to make a decision. So if you're poorly informed or don't understand something, I'll take your previous question. I haven't sat down and talked to many of the experts on all sides of that equation in Canada, around the world, to be fully informed. I could, though, as Prime Minister, I could reach out, I could form a table, I could talk to people, I could get others to do it. And so that is a real perk. There's not that many roles. Maybe you have that convening power in your role, but there's not that many roles when that's truly the case, and that is truly the case. A response.
He likes to have the power and the ability to control policy to influence the values of his stocks of Brookfield, of these shares. It's exactly what he said with this Infinium green jet fuel. Remember this one? Basically the same thing. Influencing the government to bring in green jet fuel, and then they invested in this company, Infinium. They put $1 billion to work, as he said. It's a fantastic opportunity. Being the leader of the Brookfield Party of Canada, fantastic opportunity. Meanwhile, we've got Liberal Senator Yun Pa-Woo speaking on Palestine Tribunal on Canadian responsibility, and says leaders across Canada have failed Canadians in their response to Palestine.
I'm here in my capacity as an independent senator representing British Columbia to show my support for Aziza, for Yava, for James, for Taha, and for all of the witnesses who will be testifying at the Palestine Tribunal on Friday and Saturday. This tribunal, which is led by civil society, by ordinary Canadians, or I should say extraordinary Canadians, reflects a groundswell of discontent in the Canadian public about how their government, how their leaders across civil society, across business, across the education sector, the charitable sector, have failed them in responding appropriately according to the rule of law and according to moral precepts in stopping the genocide in Gaza.
That's all he seems to care about. Does this guy even care about Canadians? And just a quick refresher, if anyone has forgot, Yun Pa-Woo is on the list of 11 compromised members of government. Remember the 11 we never got to know who they are? Thanks to Sam Cooper, we got these, but we don't know the rest of them here.